My name is Jess Harmon. I'm 33 years old. And the morning my brother walked through my shop on opening day and told me nobody was driving to a strip mall to buy old dresses was when I understood that the people who doubt you loudest are usually the ones who never tried the thing themselves. He said it pleasantly. That was the part one had to sit with longest. Not the words, but the delivery, the particular ease of someone who believes he is giving you useful information. He had arrived 20 minutes before I opened, which I had interpreted as support, and he walked the floor slowly, touching things, nodding in the politely assessing way he had, and then he stopped at the rack near the window and said, "Jess, this is nice. But who's driving to some strip mall to buy old dresses?" My mother was behind him. She leaned toward my father and said, quietly enough that I was meant to hear it, "He has a point." My father looked at the floor for a moment, then at me. "If it doesn't work out," he said, "I can lend you something to get back on your feet." He said it gently, the way you say something you believe is generous. I reached into my jacket pocket and handed him a business card. The ones I had printed 3 weeks earlier at a shop in Midtown, matte finish, the logo I had spent 4 evenings getting right, and I said I appreciated that. Then I walked to the front door, turned the deadbolt, and opened it. What none of them knew, standing in that shop on opening day, was that the location they were calling a strip mall had a lease I had negotiated down to $2,400 per month over 5 years, and that the inventory on those racks had cost me $31,000 to build over 22 months, and that I had already pre-sold $8,700 in merchandise to 12 customers who had been following my sourcing Instagram for 14 months and had been asking me when I was going to open a physical location since the previous spring. The strip mall had 340 parking spaces and a corner anchor spot with 17 feet of window frontage. I had chosen it on purpose. I should explain what I was doing before the shop, because the shop did not come from nowhere. I had worked for 6 years as a visual merchandiser at Caldwell & Rowe, a mid-size regional department store chain based in White Plains, New York, where I had started as a floor associate at 22 and had been promoted twice, first to junior visual coordinator, then to senior visual merchandiser for the tri-state flagship locations. The job was, in its way, a precise education in exactly what I would later need: how people move through a retail space, what makes them stop, what makes them reach for something, how light and height and density interact to create the feeling of abundance or scarcity, how a rack of clothing can look like a wall to get past or a thing worth exploring depending entirely on how it is arranged. I had been sourcing vintage clothing as a personal practice since I was 24, which was the year I found a 1962 Emilio Pucci blouse at a Goodwill in Stamford for $4 and sold it 2 weeks later on eBay for $340. I had not planned to sell it. I had bought it because it was beautiful and because $4 was not a decision. The sale happened because a colleague saw the photograph I had posted on Instagram and told me her friend collected vintage Italian knitwear and would I be interested in selling. I was interested. Over the following 4 years, I had built a sourcing practice that was systematic in the way my work at Caldwell & Rowe had taught me to be systematic about retail. I sourced on a schedule, estate sales on Saturday mornings, specific Goodwill outlet locations on Tuesdays when the bins turned, targeted searches on 3 auction platforms I had come to know well, and I graded everything I bought against a consistent set of criteria: condition, provenance where verifiable, market comparables from recent completed sales, and what I had come to call the hold rate, which was my own informal measure of whether a piece made someone reach for it or step back from it when they encountered it unexpectedly. The Instagram account I had started in the second year of sourcing, at Remadine Winter, had grown to 23,400 followers by the time I signed the lease. Not all of them were buyers. A meaningful percentage were other resellers, stylists, photographers, and people who found the sourcing photographs interesting without any intention to purchase. I had studied the account's engagement patterns closely enough to know which 3,100 of those followers had clicked through to purchase links at least twice in the previous 12 months. Those 3,100 people were my actual customer base, and I knew their size preferences, their price tolerance, and their category interests at a level of granularity that most retail operations would have paid significantly for. My brother did not know any of this. My parents did not know any of this. I had not shared the revenue numbers from the Instagram sales, which totaled $94,000 over 3 years, net of sourcing costs and platform fees, because it was not the kind of number that landed correctly without context, and the context required explaining a business model that I had not yet finished explaining to myself. The decision to open the physical location had taken me 18 months to make, which was the appropriate amount of time for a decision of that size. I had looked at 47 spaces before I signed the lease on the one I signed. The strip mall my brother dismissed was a reconverted shopping center in Larchmont, New York, with a tenant mix that included a well-reviewed Vietnamese restaurant, a yoga studio that had been in the same location for 11 years, and a French bakery that had a line on weekend mornings before 9. The anchor tenant was a Whole Foods. I had walked the parking lot on 6 different days at 6 different times before I made an offer on the lease. The foot traffic was real, and it was consistent, and it was the kind of customer who would stop for a window that gave them something worth stopping for. I had designed that window myself. The shop opened on a Saturday in April. My brother arrived at 10:40. The first customer arrived at 10:53, a woman named Gloria Trent who had been following at Remadine Winter for 2 years and who had driven from Bronxville specifically to see the space and to purchase a 1970s Halston jersey wrap dress she had messaged me about 4 months earlier when I posted it, and which I had held for her because she had asked me to and because she had purchased 7 times before and had never once failed to follow through. Gloria bought the Halston and 3 other pieces that morning. Her total was $847. I did not tell my family about Gloria. I did not tell them about the 11 other pre-sale customers who came through in the first 3 days, or about the fact that by the end of opening weekend I had done $6,200 in sales, which was more than my projected monthly break-even on the lease. I did not tell them because I was in the middle of it, and because the middle of a thing is not a report. The first month ended with $18,400 in sales. The second month was $21,700. The third month, I hired my first part-time employee, a woman named Carmen Reyes who had worked retail for 8 years and who understood the specific pace of a shop that was not a transaction machine but a place people came to look, the kind of patience that required, and the kind of attention. My brother called at the end of month 3 to check in, which was the first time he had called since opening day. He asked how it was going. I told him the shop was doing well. He said that was great and asked if I was turning a profit yet. I told him I had been turning a profit since month 2. He said, "Wow, really?" in the particular tone of someone whose mental model has just been updated against its will. I told him I appreciated him coming to the opening. He said, "Of course, that's what family was for," and the conversation moved on. The New York Times piece did not come directly to me. It came, as most good press does, from something that was already happening and that someone with the right vantage point decided was worth describing to a larger audience. The reporter's name was Daphne Osei. She was a contributing writer for the style section who had been working on a piece about the physical resurgence of brick-and-mortar vintage retail, specifically the category of founder-operated single-location stores that had opened in the post-pandemic period and had built loyal followings through social media before opening physical doors. She had found at Remadine Winter through a recommendation from a stylist she had interviewed, and she had visited the shop twice without identifying herself as a journalist, which I learned later and which I found interesting, not unsettling, just interesting. The way it is interesting to discover that something you built has been watched carefully by someone whose job is to watch things carefully. She emailed me in October, 8 months after opening, to ask if I would be willing to be interviewed for the piece. She was direct about the scope. It would be a feature in the style section, likely running in the print edition and online, focused on the sourcing practice and the store's curation philosophy. She said the piece was not purely about my store. There were 3 other founders in it, but that my operation was the anchor subject. I replied the same day and said I would be glad to speak with her. We met at the shop on a Tuesday morning before I opened, which was the quietest time and the time when the space showed what it actually was rather than what it became when people were moving through it. Daphne was precise and unhurried. She asked questions about sourcing methodology, about how I thought about curation, about the relationship between the Instagram practice and the physical space. She asked about Caldwell and Rowe and what I had learned about retail from the inside of a large operation. I answered everything directly. I had nothing to manage in that conversation. No version of events I needed to protect, no gap between what I was saying and what was true. The piece ran on the first Sunday in December. I knew it was coming. Daphne had sent a fact-check email the previous week with specific details to confirm, but I did not know the placement until I opened the Times app at 7:15 that morning and found it at the top of the style section. The headline used the phrase "Store of the Year" in the subhead, which was language the editors had added. Daphne had not used that phrase in any of our conversations. I read the piece sitting on the edge of my bed in the particular stillness of early morning. Then I got up, made coffee, drove to the shop, and started preparing for what I understood was going to be a different kind of Saturday. My phone began to register the volume change at 9:40 when the piece had been live for a little over 2 hours. Carmen arrived at 10 and looked at the notifications on my screen and said, "How many?" I told her. She said, "I'm calling Petra." Petra Lindqvist was the second part-time employee I had brought on in September, a former fashion buyer with 12 years of experience at a mid-sized New York import house who had relocated to Westchester and who had come in for an interview after seeing the shop and deciding, as she told me directly, that she wanted to work somewhere that was doing something worth doing. I had hired her immediately. Petra arrived at 10:20. By 10:30 there were 14 people in the shop, which was more than I had ever had simultaneously in the space. By 11 there were 23. By noon the line extended outside the door, and I had put up a handwritten sign asking customers to allow 10 minutes between entries so everyone could move comfortably. The day's total was $14,300. It was the highest single-day sales figure in the 8 months since opening. I stood at the register at closing time and looked at the shop, the racks that had been picked through and needed resetting, the window display that had been photographed by at least 40 people I had counted, the floor that needed sweeping, and I thought about my brother standing in that same space 8 months earlier, touching things, telling me nobody was driving here. I picked up the broom and started from the back. My mother called Sunday evening. She had read the piece. My aunt had texted her the link at 8 in the morning, which I knew because my aunt had also texted me a screenshot of the text she had sent my mother because my aunt was the kind of person who documented her own good deeds. My mother's voice had the quality it took on when she was working through something larger than she had prepared for. "Jess," she said. "The New York Times." "Yes," I said. "They called it the Store of the Year." "In the subhead?" I said. "It was the editors." She was quiet for a moment. "I whispered that your brother had a point," she said. "On opening day." "I know," I said. I should have been more." She stopped. Started again. "I just worried. The lease, the inventory costs. I worried you were taking too much risk." "I know you did," I said. "You weren't wrong to worry. The risk was real." "But you had done the work," she said. "I had been doing it for 2 years before I opened," I said. "You didn't know that part." She was quiet for a long moment. I heard her set something down. "I would have liked to know," she said. "I know," I said. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you more." It was the truest thing I could offer. It was not that I had been protecting myself from her doubt, exactly. It was that I had been protecting the work from the noise that doubt creates, even the well-intentioned kind, and that protection had cost her the chance to be part of it sooner. That was a real cost. I had made the calculation and I did not regret it, but I could acknowledge that it had a cost. She asked about the piece, Daphne's questions, the fact-check, the photograph they had used. I told her about the 2 visits before the interview, which she found interesting. We talked for 31 minutes. Before she hung up, she said, "Can I come see it?" "The shop. I want to actually see it." "Of course," I said. "Come Saturday." She came Saturday. She brought my aunt. They stayed 2 hours and 40 minutes, which was the longest either of them had ever stayed anywhere that required standing. My mother bought a 1968 Diane von Furstenberg wrap dress that Carmen had found at an estate sale in Greenwich 3 weeks earlier and that had been waiting on the feature rack for the right person. My mother held it for a long time before she decided. I gave her my family discount, which I had not told her existed until that day. My father called on Monday. He had read the piece on Sunday but had waited to call, which was his pattern. He processed before he reached for the phone, and he arrived at conversations prepared. He asked about the business model in the specific way he asked about things he was taking seriously, sequentially with follow-up questions, until he had a complete picture. I walked him through it, sourcing costs, margin structure, lease terms, staffing, the Instagram customer base, and how it had translated to in-store traffic. He listened without interrupting, which was what he did when he was genuinely learning something. When I finished, he said, "I offered to lend you money when it closed." "You did," I said. "I was offering because I wanted to be useful," he said. I had no idea what I was looking at. "I know," I said. "The business card was a good answer," he said. I had not thought of it as an answer at the time. I had thought of it as the most honest thing I could put in his hand at that moment, something real, something that said, "This is what this is, and I am not afraid of it." But I understood what he meant. "I just wanted you to have something concrete," I said. He said he had kept it. It was on his desk at home, he said, which I found, in the particular way that small details land when you are not expecting them, more than I had anticipated. My brother texted on Wednesday. The text said, "Hey, saw the Times piece. Really well done. Proud of you." Then, 4 hours later, a second text. Random ask, "Any chance you'd be open to me posting about the shop? I have like 4K followers on Instagram and could drive some traffic your way." I looked at both texts for a moment. Then I replied to the first one, "Thank you, means a lot." To the second, "I appreciate it. The shop's doing well on traffic right now, but I'll keep it in mind." He replied with a thumbs up. And that was that. It was not a confrontation. It was not a reckoning or a repair or a conversation that required either of us to revisit opening day in explicit terms. He had been wrong, and the Times piece had made it impossible for him to be wrong in the same way anymore, and he had adjusted in the way that people adjust when the facts change around them. I did not need more from him than that. I had not built the shop for more than that. I had built it because I had something I knew how to do, and a location I had chosen carefully, and a customer base I had cultivated for 2 years, and a window I had designed to make people stop. The people who drove to that strip mall bought things they had not known they were looking for. That was the whole point of the thing. Carmen came full-time in January. Petra stayed part-time through the spring, and then moved to 4 days a week when the sourcing volume required more hands in the back room. I hired a third employee in March, a woman named Simona Chaby, who had a background in textile conservation and who could assess condition and provenance on pieces that required a more trained eye than mine. Simone had come to the shop as a customer first, had returned 4 times, and had eventually left a note at the register asking if I was hiring. I was not yet hiring at that moment. 3 weeks later, I was. I brought on a business accountant named Femi Oduya in February because the tax situation had become complicated in the ways that tax situations become complicated when a business is growing at a rate that outpaces its administrative infrastructure. Femi had been recommended by Carmen, whose husband had used him for a contracting business, and who described him as someone who found clarity where there had been disorder, which was an accurate description. The lease renewal conversation. The shop's original 5-year term still had 4 years remaining, but the landlord had reached out in the spring to discuss terms on the adjacent unit, which had become available, was handled with the assistance of a commercial real estate attorney named Walla Singh, who had been recommended by my Caldwell and Rowe colleague Renata Pierce, with whom I had stayed in touch, and who had gone into commercial property management after leaving the department store chain. Wallace reviewed the proposed terms and came back with 4 modifications. The landlord accepted 3. Wallace said this was a good outcome for a second-year tenant in that market. I signed the expansion lease on a Thursday afternoon in April at my desk in the back office, with the shop open and the sound of Carmen and Simone moving through the floor in the particular rhythm I had come to know well, the pace of people who understood what they were doing and why it mattered. The expanded space added 800 square feet to the original 1,200. I redesigned the floor plan myself, which took 3 weekends and 2 conversations with a visual merchandising consultant named Orla Dean, who had worked for 12 years in museum retail and who understood curation as architecture in a way that matched how I thought about it. The expansion opened on a Tuesday in June, a quiet day by design, because I had learned in the first year that the days worth protecting were the ones that let you establish the room before the crowd arrived. My mother came on the Tuesday. She brought my aunt again, and this time my father came too. He stood in the new section for a long time, the longer room, the higher ceiling, the light I had positioned to fall at the angle that made the color in the fabrics visible from 15 feet away. He walked the full length of it slowly, the way he moved through things he was assessing seriously. Then he came back to where I was standing near the original room's entrance, and he looked at the two spaces together, the original and the new, the thing I had started with, and the thing it had become. "This is a real business," he said. It was not a revelation to me. It had been a real business since month 2. But it was real to him now, in the way that things become real when you are standing inside them rather than imagining them from the outside, and I understood the difference. "Yes," I said. "It is. There is a specific thing that happens when you hand someone a business card on the day they offer you money for when you fail. It is not defiance, exactly. It is something quieter than that, a kind of precision. You are saying, here is what this is. I have thought about it more carefully than you have. The card is evidence of that, and I am not going to argue about it because the argument is not the point. The thing is the point. My father kept that card on his desk. I did not know that until he told me on the phone 8 months later, and when he told me I understood it as the thing it was, a man watching closely in his own way from the beginning. Some people's belief arrives late. That does not make it worth less than the kind that arrives on time. It makes it a different thing, a thing that had to travel farther to get to you, that had more to overcome. When it arrives, you receive it for what it is. Not for what you wished it had been earlier. That is not a small thing. It is just a different shape of the same thing. There's a moment I keep coming back to, my dad telling me on the phone that he had kept the business card on his desk. He never said anything about it on opening day. He just kept it. If someone who doubted you turned out to have been watching more carefully than you knew, what would you want to say to them? Leave it in the comments. If this story found you at the right time, hit like and subscribe. New stories every week, and the bell means you won't miss the next one. Thank you for being here.